I think the choice of any model of schooling depends on two things. One is, do you have the appropriate resources to provide education in an alternative format, and two, do you have a reasonably credible testing mechanism? So if homeschooling is to become widespread, these two elements have to be there. The parents or whoever is teaching the kids have to be dedicated and capable, and two, that the kids have to be subject to some standardized testing so that the society knows that they have been through a process and they have been, they have sort of cleared the test. Now, I think perhaps we do a lot of homeschooling without calling it that, but if parents are not in a position to teach kids, either because they don't have the time or more importantly they don't have the capacity, and we cannot have a standardized system of testing which brings kids from outside the school system, then I think it's really a kind of a long-term objective perhaps, but it's not something that should be mainstream to our policy right now. I think we have to worry about three aspects of our schooling system. One is we have to make sure that there is access. Now, homeschooling provides access, but not necessarily the other two. Two is we have to ensure that there is quality, and that means not just a passing out exam, but continuous evaluation, meaningful evaluation of the right things. And three, we have to ensure that models that work get replicated, that is acceleration. So these are the three building blocks to my mind of meaningful, a good education policy. How are we addressing each of these challenges? Well, I don't think you need to measure creativity in the way that you could measure a quantitative skill or a reading skill or writing skill. What you need to do is create an environment, provide an environment where creativity is encouraged. Now, if kids are evaluated in the schooling process because they have good reading, writing, quantitative skills, and no attention, no value, no recognition is given to the so-called creative pursuits, whatever they may be, then you will not encourage creativity. There's a very fundamental proposition that applies, I think, to virtually every situation, which is what does not get managed, what does not get measured, does not get managed. And this is why aspects, behavioral characteristics like creativity tend to get left behind in school systems, because it's not something you can measure. I think it's not a question of measuring it, I think it's a question of creating the right environment. So are you encouraging kids to take on creative pursuits? Are you recognizing that they're doing it? Maybe some test or the other, but obviously there is a subjective element to it. But are you giving them enough space, mind space, time, physical space to engage in creative pursuit? I think that's what's needed. It's really very, very dangerous to put kids in a situation where the parent is taking on the responsibility of meeting the school's requirements. I've seen that happen to my kids' generation as well. We are often, as parents, we find it difficult to resist the temptation to make sure that the kid is meeting the requirements come what may. And I think that is something which does two things, in my view, which are both negative. One is it tells the kid that, hey, look, there's some things you need to focus on, the other things somebody else will do for you, which is I think the wrong message to be sending to kids, particularly that young. And two is it de-emphasizes the role and the value of things that are not measured in the exams. And both of these are negative aspects of our education system. I can understand why we've got to that point, and I certainly see the need to roll it back a little bit and encourage this creativity. But it has to be done at a system-wide level. It cannot be. It has not of much value if it's done in isolation, in sort of isolated spots. So that the system needs to take account of this. I'm very sympathetic to this underlying philosophy that education after all is inquiry, exploration, experimentation, and that is something that the kid perhaps does best on his own. And so there is I think a huge role for this kind of self-learning that needs to be brought into the system formally. But I think it remains incomplete unless the teacher then plays a very specific and a very critical role as a mentor. Kids can acquire knowledge very quickly, but they find it difficult, I think, until they reach a level of maturity to sort of add it all up to look for deeper meanings or higher meanings, which is what makes them, so let's say, constructive or valuable members of a social framework, a social system. That adding up or abstraction, if you will, call it what you want, that is something that the teacher plays a role in doing. And if we have this kind of methodology of self-teaching or self-learning, the complementarity of the teacher's capabilities and attitude is very important. So it cannot be, it's not a substitute. You said, look, let's just take the teachers out of the system. No, that's not the answer. The answer is that you have to have the right kind of teaching capacity, the teaching attitude to leverage of this. So I think they're very important experiments, and I think we also need to understand what the ecosystem within which this methodology works, and I think that combination will work. Whether it is replicable and on a mass level, I don't know. I think these have been relatively small experiments, and they work at that level. When you scale them up, I don't think we have enough evidence to suggest. We don't have evidence either way, so I think we should be a little cautious about looking at replicability. No, I think even smarter kids need guidance in terms of contextualizing. Smart kids can solve problems very quickly. They will understand the underlying principles and reach solutions. But to provide a larger context, a social context, perhaps a historical context, a political context, to understand why all of what they're learning is important, how does it link up to the society in which they live, the physical environment in which they live, that needs to be given to smart kids as well. It's not something that they will figure out on their own. So mentoring, teacher as mentor, is, I think, a significant transition in the whole education philosophy, as opposed to teacher as the content provider. That phase is gone now, because content can be provided by anybody from anywhere. You don't need the person physically present to provide content. But that content delivered without the contextualization, I think, is not dangerous, but its value is I think, significantly diluted. And so that complementarity between content and mentor, or content and context, I would call it, that is very critical.
So context provider instead
yes,
of content.
Yes.
Just one last question. Why do you think conferences like OneGlobe are important?
Well, firstly, they bring a very diverse set of people together. This is not a specialized or professional conference where research findings are being discussed. They bring people who are generally interested in the way the world is going and have concerns about various things. Give them quick exposure to issues, perspectives from experts. There are no definitive answers or solutions coming out of the discussion. But I think it helps to focus people's mind and attention on specific problems, and they take these learnings back, link it up to the larger concerns that they have, or the environment in which they're operating. So it's really a sort of a knowledge sharing in a very constructive way.